Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 771. Hyy Hound. Tekker's shield vanished and a tremendous pressure descended on Monique once the protection was gone. She felt like a fish, as it suddenly became hard to breathe. She came to a halt, as she tried to acclimatize to the sudden change. "Kook, what dungeon are you from? Stop disguising as surface dwellers. The natives of this place could never harm our perfect immortal bodies," the boss exclaimed when he finally got a chance to pause after being driven into a corner. Not answering, she checked the creature's status. Aerial General Leave 96, Boss. Status, Burning, Poisoned. Health, 164/1000. Several wounds burning with the toxic alchemical flame covered the body of the creature, which was slowly turning a dull grey thanks to the smoke filling it. However, she wasn't much better off. Despite all the buffs she used, she was tired. It had taken a lot to finally corner the elusive boss. With Tekker's shield gone, she could the pressure in her ears, and small cuts from silent whines started appearing across her skin and armor. Brilliance of Fervor had helped her keep up until now and chip away at the beast's health, as they fought a duel to the death. The boss was really something for being able to break the shield given by Tekker. Without the shield, Monique was now susceptible to the weird creature's invisible wind and air skills. She could barely hear his rambling through her ripping eardrums. She used his rambling to gather her powers. The chosen of Athena intended to end it with the next attack. She had to end it, or she might lose not even knowing how. "I can hardly understand what you are mumbling, but I get the gist. I will tell you the name of your killer. I am Monique Lest, a lord of Minas Mar," she said under heavy breathing as she readied her skill. A bright light enveloped her, as she used the outbreak of fervor, doubling her power for 3 minutes. But it didn't stop there. Tatzel's sacrifice vanished within the huge phantom of a divine spear, as she executed Iapeto's stab, which added another 250% damage to her attack. Even when she herself only did physical damage, and her enemy was immune to physical damage, her buffs did not differentiate between magical and physical damage. The tribal flame of Ray, the alchemical fire from Allison, and Athena's divine power, she deemed this more than enough for a final strike, after multiplying their power by several times. The massive divine spear directly disintegrated the phantom's translucent body. It vanished, together with the message that she gained experience. With the power of outbreak of fervor, she planned to rush back and help the others, but she returned to a field of black fog with almost zero vision. This meant the shaman had succeeded in his weather spell and created a field of mist from the atomized solution he got from Allison. Not only was it highly toxic to the phantoms, they also could no longer hide in the clear air. Monique returned to a party that was busy taking care of the remnants. With the fog field in place, Jonah had been the first to finish his mini-boss and returned to the party. Azul seemed to have also finished her mini-boss. Afterward, the party had been busy taking down the small fries, while they waited on their leader. Monique had heard notifications, but she had been locked in combat and unable to comprehend that her comrades had already decimated most of the enemy. "What now?" Tekker asked, tired. As the tank who constantly kept the aggro of several hundred beasts, he was the most tired of them all. "We will take a good long rest and then we will take a look at the next floor," Monique said with a smile. She also needed a good rest. "The next floor? This place has more floors?" Allison asked, surprised. "Yeah, the entrance opened after I killed the boss. Follow me, we will camp close to it." Monique didn't have the time to take a better look at the time, since she was worried about the others and rushed back, but she had seen the ground open at the place where she had killed the boss. As she led the party back, they quickly saw the place she mentioned. In the middle of the meadow, a gorge had opened. Steam and dark red light emitted from below. They saw the beginning of a staircase leading down to the edge of this gorge. "Is that really a way to the second floor? It looks more like a pathway to hell," Shay commented with a frown. "We will find out once we go down there," Monique countered with a laugh. But first they set up camp to get some good rest. Although the boss was dead and theoretically the floor was safe, temporarily, they set up several barriers to protect and hide their presence, just in case, before they all went to bed. Yulkat's Fury was surrounded by a big group of mushroom fiddlers that kept jumping back and forth between the trees around them. It was clear they were trying to confuse the party, however, they were prepared this time. "I beseech the nymphs downpour." Lixis, their half-elven elementalist, cast a water spell that led to a monsoon-like rains that drenched the whole area. After which Mike suddenly lifted his hands to the sky above. Even when they were in a dungeon, there was a skybox, so it counted. Hailstorm. Tempest of Mahis, the sword demon shouted, activating the skill of his armor and one of the skills he had gained with his blessing. In a radius of 10 meters around him, a heavy hailstorm started raging, but then he finished the second cast, the storm became even more violent and grew in diameter. While the party took shelter behind the shield, the mushroom forest surrounding them was covered in a layer of ice. After Mina's tests, they had come up with a few strategies. Seeing their weakness to ice, the party had quickly changed their gears and came up with several combination plays centered around their ice skills to counter the spore explosions. Although the heavy ice storm did not kill the creepy mushroom skeletons, it severely slowed them down, making it hard for them to move, or hide in the frozen wasteland. Not only was Mike quicker on the ice, the impeded fiddlers were also an easy target for Mina, playing the role of an assassin in a traditional style, by hiding her presence and killing them with her daggers. Mike worked together with Lixus since his flaming fury would have molten the ice again. While the elementalist worked to further freeze them, Mike went around, crushing the ice sculptures with headbutts. Similarly, Finn had also changed her strategy. Instead of using her full force to end her opponents immediately, she relied on the frost moth dusters. With quick, deliberate punches she increased her number of punches and the subsequently summoned frost moths. The swarm of frost moths themselves was already enough to push back the mushroom creatures, but then there was also Finn hiding among the moths, delivering deadly punches, once one of the creatures fell under a frozen status. This way, they too managed to proceed quickly through the mushroom reef and reach Leave 92 just before facing the boss of the forest. While the mushroom fiddlers were clearly humanoid skeletons controlled and armored by fungi, the boss was different. Hyy Hound Leave 98, boss. It was a giant wolf skeleton, with easily 6 or 7 meters of shoulder height. It had a mane and scales of mushroom caps, covering the bones like an armor. Only its skull and overall build were recognizable as that of a canine. Upon seeing them with its dead, hollow eye cavities, and howled to the sky. A howl that sounded like the flapping of hundreds of fleshy wings, mushroom caps rustling in the wind. Ugh! Cough! It came as a surprise when they suddenly all started coughing again. The howl was not just a sign of the start of the fight, it was a breath attack, enveloping them in invisible spores. They had gotten negligent. Embarrassed, they looked back up at the hound. This boss fight may get harder than expected. Chapter 772 Hyy Hound, 2. In quick succession, a strong gale blew around their clothes before a flame shield enveloped the party. Lixus had reacted in time to prevent further harm. The stream of spores leaving the hound's throat met the fire shield in a bloom of glowing ember, as the spore cloud burned up. They were still not in the green, as the flame shield shook under the pressure of the breath. Still looking up, they were distracted by a sudden fit of coughing and choking. The half-elf paid a heavy price for forcefully chanting her magic despite breathing in the spores. She had fallen to her knees, vomiting blood and mushrooms. Her whole body shook in pain and disgust as they threw up quickly growing pieces of hypha. Bulko quickly went to her, putting his massive hands on her shoulders. With direct contact, he was able to share most of his stats with her, as his and Finn's healing magic kept her alive. Their healing magic could only heal the injuries, but could not get out the invasive growths. The mirror priest could only share his and buff her basic stats to resist the invasion like it was an ordinary disease. These spores could be deemed an absolute mage killer. One could only resist it with strong physical attributes, a specialized caster's worst trait. Especially endurance played a huge role, because of the basic defense, which also counted for the body's innards. The spores were not very strong, so they wouldn't be able to do much to someone with a strong body. The less damage the spores could do, the less they could grow. By sharing his stats, he enabled the half-elf to resist the invasion. What Lixus then had to do was cough it all out. In the meantime, the fire shield broke, but the party was still safe since Finn had erected a second shield within the fire shield to block the breath. This was when things started becoming tricky. The moment the Hyy Hound finished his howl, he vanished from the clearing they had first spotted him. Be careful, it's in the trees, Mina warned them. Like the mushroom fiddlers, the boss used the reefs of mushrooms to travel and hide with high agility. In the next moments, a pair of claws attacked the fairy's shield from the darkness, leaving several marks on the golden shield. We won't be able to freeze it like this. It's too big and too fast, Mike commented. The boss was built differently from the mushroom fiddlers. It was bigger and more massive, freezing it would be hard if it was moving like that. It could easily escape the range of hailstorm or other attacks when it noticed what they tried to do. Can't we just fight it normally? We don't know if it can also suicide bomb, Finn suggested, but Mike denied it. Taking into account the power of its breath, they couldn't risk it to self-destruct. It might have very well meant their end. Even if they were currently fighting in a dungeon and wouldn't die in theory, the loss of experience at their current level would mean a huge loss. Not to mention that none of them wanted to risk dying such a grotesque death. Being eaten alive from the inside out by mushrooms? No, fuck that. I have an idea, the wheezing Lixus entered the conversation. If you can make it stand still for a second and the ground, I'm sure I can do something about its movements. While the boss chipped away at Finn's barrier, the party came up with a plan. By the time the barrier broke, the Hyy Hound faced a flurry of flaming sword strikes. Mike, looking like an anthropomorphic lion, was pushing back the boss, while the party spread out. Physically, the transformed Mike was able to rival the beast, and from the beast's reaction, his attacks were also effective, but the team leader quickly noticed something disheartening. He was currently swinging the improved Flaming Fury, which not only had a higher physical damage and mental resistance but also added 50%, instead of 20% additional fire damage. However, his fire damage was almost negligible. His powerful sword strike could cut the bizarre mushroom cap armor of the creature, but the fire only blackened the growths. His attacks were unable to set the opponent on fire. This meant, unlike the mushroom fiddler, the boss had a great resistance to fire attacks. Be careful, it seems like the boss had a good resistance to fire, Mike was letting the others know. This was most important to Lixus, so she would not waste mana on fire spells. While the others got into position, the lion had a grim duel with the hound as claws and sword kept clashing. The sword demon showed the superior skill as the sword time and time again cut away at the mushroom armor of the overgrown skeleton. Suddenly, as the sword bit deep into the bones of the boss front limb, the grotesque creature came to a halt. This was the moment they had waited for. Flaming Fury's mind disruption had a 40% chance to trigger stun or confusion. Even when the chance was lowered against a boss, it had finally activated. The party didn't need any additional signal. Mike hurriedly stepped back, as the earth under their feet came to life and the boss was bound in place by earthen shackles that covered all of its four limbs all the way up to the elbows in the front and the heels in the back. Now that its mobility was taken away, the party enacted its former strategy. Lixus covered the ground and soaked the boss in water. Mike froze the ground with his boots and summoned a hailstorm with his brigandine. Finn rushed close to the beast, punching it to spawn dozens of frost moths that helped further freeze it. When it was covered in a thick layer of ice, they got ready to deliver the final attack. However, before they had the chance, it recovered from the stun and everything went against their expectations. Ice easily broke away. Their combo of ice and water skills had enveloped the hound in a carapace of ice, but the boss was not at all impressed by this. The moment it moved, it shook its body like a wet dog, spraying the party with massive chunks of ice. Frost had little to no effect on the boss of the first floor. The strategy Yulecat's fur had come up with had become useless. Released from the ice, the hound got free from the earthen binds Lixus had used to bind the boss in place as they executed their combo attack. It got out. Hurry and get back. Mike shouted for the party to reassemble around Bulko, who was prepared to raise another barrier. The creature's vision was interrupted as a swarm of frost moths surrounded its head to cover their retreat. Despite their numbers, the frost moths didn't withstand even a single howl, as they were disintegrated and their remnants turned into mushrooms by the cloud of spores. With quick and agile movement, the boss took to the air and traveled between the mushroom reefs to fire its spore breath at them. Its target was the small golden frost moth that had given it trouble earlier. Finn's protection of Bess was still on cooldown, same for her barrier magic. She faced the sudden attack defenseless. I will cover you. Mike called out, using the Flaming Fury and the powers of Mahis to stop the cloud of spore with a wave of fire. However, emerging from the cover of the burning cloud of spores was the Hyy Hound. The boss crashed into Mike, intent on ripping him apart when it suddenly winced. Cursed frost! A dark figure had appeared on the hound's back. Mina had used the chance for a backstabbing attack, using the shard of biting ice ramming the dagger deep between the hound's shoulder blades. She cast the item's special skill. The bizarre beast was covered in a carapace of cursed ice, that would absorb its life force for 5 minutes, or until it was broken. Mike quickly got up and the sibling rejoined their party. The boss obviously had a good resistance to ice, too. It was uncertain for how long the cursed ice would hold. Watching the health of the boss get drained, it was clear that even if the ice held for 5 minutes, it was not enough for it. Anybody any other ideas? Chapter 773 Hyy Hound, 3. I could try hitting it with Plague Strike, Mina offered after a moment of silence. Plague Strike was the final move of Asclepius Needle which was able to inflict the target with a deadly disease. Considering that the plague powers of Sekhmet had worked on the mushroom fiddler, she suspected that diseases also had to be one of the weaknesses of the fungus beasts. Couldn't you just keep slashing at it with your shadow magic to infect it with diseases? Mike argued. Plague Strike had a 2-4 cooldown and her brother was apprehensive to waste it on the first boss they met. It's a boss. It would take ages to inflict it with something serious if it works at all, Mina explained. One of the powers she gained from Sekhmet was that all her attacks and magic carried the plague attribute, but she couldn't use any direct spells to inflict diseases. With just the passive attribute, it was unlikely to kill a high-level boss like this. Let me at him. If Finn gets really big, Finn could just stomp him, the brute suggested energetically. She seemed still pissed about being targeted. It was true, Finn's strength and endurance also increases with her transformation. The only problem was that her agility and dexterity also tended to lower with size. There was no way to hit the agile boss in that state. But now. That's not a bad idea, but we have to hurry and decide. If Finn stomps him now while he is still frozen, she might be able to deal massive damage, Bulko pondered. Mike hesitated for a moment, but nobody came up with a better idea. Fine, let's observe when the cursed ice is going to break, then Finn stomps him before he can get free. This way they could maximize the use they could get out of Mina's freezing skill and afterward, judging by how much damage Finn's rampage would deal, they still had Mina's Plague Strike as a backup. Booyah! Finn cheered before her tiny figure started to stretch and turn. The little fairy grew in size, until there stood a giant dwarf-like figure among them, easily breaching the 15m mark. Wouldn't it be better if you stayed around the boss's size? Mina asked, a little worried about her lowered agility. I know what you are worried about, but I don't know if I could endure the spore when I'm smaller, Fine explained her size. Since she had not turned into any special big race, she had to become several times bigger than a quarter giant like Bulko to have a similar, even slightly better, level of endurance and basic defense. All of them waited for the cursed ice to show signs of breaking, reading their attacks to coordinate with Finn's initial attack. Finn was going to take the role of a tank in this one. Mike felt a little bad since this was originally the job of his and Bulko's pet, but neither was fit to resist the spore attacks, otherwise, they would have a much easier time. In this moment of silence, Mike regretted not accepting Seth's offer, to bring Golem Knights. The walking, talking, armored skeleton automatons would have been the perfect counter to this place. But he didn't want to. Only now he realized that it was in a fit of misplaced pride, that he wanted to overcome the abyss as Yule Cat's fur, without the help of an overpowered golem to carry them. If he could change the past, he would love to be carried by an overpowered golem right about now. However, he had no temporal powers, which was why they had to face this danger with what they had with them. Hyy Hound Leave 98, Boss. Status, Frozen, Enraged. 740/1000. As the health of the boss fell below 3/4, the cursed ice started showing small crash. The cracking of ice was accompanied by a flash of power, as Finn illuminated the mushroom forest with her royal dignity. She had activated her power as the melee queen as her massive figure charged forward, with incredible speed for her size. Finn's speed was one of the powers of Arki's chest plate. As the messenger of the Titans during their war with the Olympians, Arki had incredible speed, which Finn was now using to compensate for her lowered agility and dexterity. Her, now massive, knuckle dusters crashed through the fragile ice carapace and hammered the massive boss to the ground. Finn was too experienced in real fights, to let some false sportsmanship get in her way. Mina cast her ice field, to slow the boss and ease Finn's task. Chaining her moves and control skills in melee combat, she kept the boss on the ground and hindered it from defending itself, as her massive fists kept hammering like an anvil. She knew that it would get away, the moment she let off. Her moves were so fast and fluid, that the others had a hard time finding a timing for their attacks. Even without their help, the hound's health quickly started depleting under the fists of fury. Despite the wild and violent image, the fairy still managed to make the brutal and merciless battle seem elegant and regal. Truly, a melee queen. When the boss's health fell below 1/3, it started emitting a heavy aura. At the same time, many of Finn's buffs had been exhausted. Especially the speed of Arki was only a temporary solution to her missing agility and dexterity. While the boss entered its third phase, Finn's attack became less fluid and showed more openings for the creature to fight back despite the swarm of frost moths and Mina's field of ice that should have slowed it at a similar level. The fairy was about to become desperate when the hound was about to escape her grasp when she was reminded that she was still part of a party. Bulko's healing magic slowly closed her wound, while Mike had suddenly appeared in the beast's escape path, forcing it back into the brute's range. More openings also gave Lixis more chances to time her spells. She did not use any attack spells, instead, she used various terrain spells to make it harder for the hound to flee from the giant fairy's loving care. The one helping to accumulate damage on the boss was Mina, as she kept sneaking in attacks with her shadow blades while Finn wrestled it to a standstill. As stressful as the fight was for them, it was hard to imagine how frustrated the boss must be feeling as it was constantly slammed, punched, kicked, thrown, body-checked, and stabbed. Maybe it had come to regret being so resilient. If this could go on, they were sure to win this, but things couldn't go on like this. As great as Finn's transformation was, it also cost her a huge amount of resources, in addition to fighting in that form. She had been desperately stacking up damage to defeat the hound before her time ran out, but in the end, she was forced to revert back to her original size when the boss was still left with 5% of its health. "Finn, get back," she heard the shout before she felt the shove. As she was shrinking, she tried to give the boss a last hit, but was rudely shoved out of the way. She was shoved right out of the way of a claw that had bent backward in an unworldly and anatomically harrowing manner, as a shadow domain covered the boss. It was not the skill of Mina's legendary rings, but her magic as a shadow mage. What none of them could see, as she was fused with her dark domain thanks to Associate of Darkness, the trait given by the Ring of Erebus, was Mina evading the claw thanks to the trait and performing the last hit on the boss, by stabbing Asclepius' needle directly into its skull. The plan was for the fairy to tank and finish it off, as she would have been able to endure the explosion. Seeing Finn shrink, it was clear that plan was for naught, so Mina stepped in, relying on a single trait of her weapon. With the assassin's strike, the health of the boss covered in shadows emptied out. Everyone got the message that it died and expected the spore explosion, but nothing happened. As happy as they were, they all questioned why. It was an ability almost forgotten since most creatures they fought died with a single attack. Her dagger had the enchantment of Elufsif the Asuriant, a power that would burn mana and lock the usage of skills and magic for 10 seconds after the strike. I wasn't sure whether it would work on the boss, but when I saw Finn in danger, I had to risk it. She explained afterward. "Stupid, you could have both died in that explosion." Mike scolded his little sister. "I also trusted Seth's items. I believed in the chance that the spore couldn't get me, when I'm fussed with my shadows, in addition to Associate of Darkness. Still. Let it go. In the end, everything went well, so she won't listen anyway," Bulko calmed their team leader. With a sigh, Mike could only let it go. "Fine, let's stay here and recover before we look for the way to the next floor." Although it was a hard fight, they had not given up on conquering this dungeon. At least they wanted to see the second floor, before making a final decision. Chapter 774 Fungus Night. Abyss Bridges. After crushing the stoic Twilight, Seth and Tatzel went on a long descent down a spiral staircase. Both had been looking forward to the next floor, but what came next was underwhelming. "Another bridge?" Seth mumbled, lifting his eyebrows in slight surprise. Before them appeared another bridge. It led across the same bottomless abyss. They could even see the previous bridge from below, however, they had been unable to see this one from above before. Seth couldn't see any details in the vision above, suggesting that what they saw above them was an illusion and the floors were not actually connected. This second bridge was made of stone. Like the previous suspension bridge, this one also looked old and derelict, as if it had not been maintained for centuries. The stone railing had mostly broken away, part of the left and right rims of the bridge had, too. Seth even saw a brick or two missing right in the middle. He couldn't help to suspect that, just like the brittle planks previously, some of the stones would give out under them, taking down anyone that happened to step or stand on them. Since the bridge was already so similar. "Yes, the walls around us are full of winged creatures," Tatzel affirmed his suspicion. Stoic Twilight Leave 95. The creatures on the walls were the normal versions of the previous boss. This bridge was essentially the same floor but with a higher difficulty. Like before, every time they made some progress on the bridge, a number of the Stoic Twilight on the walls would wake up and attack the bridge. Landing on the bridge in a state of disrepair, they would try to lever out stones from its paving, or the foundation to make it ultimately collapse. Even if one said this was a higher difficulty version of the previous floor, the rise was not significant enough to change Seth's and Tatzel's strategy. The flashes and explosions of magic filled the dark gorge, ending lives left and right. It became a little monotone to keep shooting at these clay pigeons, but the two spell slingers could hardly complain about the constant stream of experience. The only thing Seth really disliked about this dungeon was that all bodies fell into the darkness below and couldn't be looted at all. Although he mourned for the lost materials, the lost souls hurt even a little more. Even if Seth wasn't going to harvest them, since he wanted the experience, there were still the ordinary drops, but they mostly fell into the abyss with the creatures. At the end of this bridge waited a creature called Valiant Twilight, waving a sword made of shadows and awaiting them for a fight. Before Seth could act, Tatzel made his move and covered the mini-boss in streams of lightning, killing it where it stood, without a valiant fight, or duel to speak of. "Why are you looking at me like that, Mom? You took the last one, so this one was mine," he explained matter-of-factly. The next floors went by in a similar fashion. Different kinds of bridges and stronger kinds of monsters started appearing, throwing themselves at them, trying to destroy the crumbling bridges. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now level 93. 4 bridges and several hundred kills later, Seth gained another level. Although they had been rushing through these places, the blacksmith had to admit that the last one had become a little more challenging as more elites started appearing among the creatures attacking the bridge. Ordinary mobs were already able to survive a few of their attacks already. Seth had to personally go into combat to stop them from breaking the bridge, instead of just firing quick spells. The dungeon also seemed to accustom to them, as the creatures that started to appear had a high resistance to fire and lightning despite being wind and darkness attributed. The bard already knew that the abyss was supposed to be harder, but now he finally started feeling a little pressure that had him change the approach a little. They had turned to Seth in the role of tank and vanguard, while Tatzel took a little time to cast stronger spells, to keep the bridges safe while they walked across. "Hehe, if this keeps going you definitely will need the help of the Great Me," Puffles teased them. "Oh, really? How will the Great Puffles move on these narrow bridges? The gorge is still a no-flight zone. You won't be able to enter aerial combat with them," Seth reminded the nightmare centipede of the small hole in his theory. If Seth really summoned the giant centipede, the Eyevisor was more likely to throw them off the bridge, than to be of any help. "Puffles is too fat for the bridges," Tatzel summarized this point curtly. "I can't believe you've done this," Puffles exclaimed incredulously. "I'm simply stating the truth," the snakelet countered, gloating. When had they become so competitive? Seth asked himself as he listened to their banter. It seemed like Puffles was also surprised by the Emuji's sudden attitude. "Calm down, you two. I think we just rest here for now and continue once we had some sleep." Seth interrupted them. They had reached the start of the next bridge, which should have been their 6th floor. Despite the fights not being that difficult, the bridges were extremely long and it was hard to estimate how long they had been walking through the darkness. Seth felt tired enough to take a nap before continuing. The next moment a pair of golem knights appeared beside Seth to stand guard while they rested. He had left most golems at Minas Mar to make up for the field teams having a field trip, but he still took a few along for duties like this. "Mushroom dungeon. Maybe we should look for another dungeon," Mike finally suggested. After resting they had looked for a path to the next floor. The search didn't take long. Past the clearing where they found the boss, they found a rough earthen tunnel at the foot of a mushroom reef. There was no staircase or anything, only a slippery dirt slope. They had followed it for a while before they reached a floor that didn't look any different from the previous floor. The monsters on the other hand were. And their difficulty made a huge jump. Fungus Knight level 95, Elite. They had a humanoid size but were covered in the same mushroom armor as the Hyy Hound, looking like humans overgrown with mushrooms. Like the boss, they were fast, strong, and resistant to fire and ice. Even when they were weaker than the boss, they were an absolute pain to fight. After several battles, Mike finally made his suggestion. It was incredibly clear that they had terrible compatibility with this place. It would be easier to leave while they were still at the start and look for a different dungeon. "Might not be the worst idea," Mina agreed slowly. Seeing the power of the normal monsters on the 2nd floor, they doubted they would be able to take on the boss of the 2nd floor. "It just has a terrible compatibility with us, it takes too long, compared to the experience we gain," Lixus tried to justify their decision weakly. It was more for their own pride though. Despite their legendary items and divine powers, it was a fact that they were giving up. The Abyss had gotten its first victory. Theater Dimension. A hooded god slightly leaned over to the god in a gaudy robe covered in stars. Round 2 got a little tougher. Are you already regretting betting with me? The hood asked the robe mischievously. He felt really happy that he managed to strike up a bet on Myanmar's results in the Holy Land. He was absolutely confident that they wouldn't have an easy time. The bet was simple. The system god bet that none of the people of Myanmar that entered the abyss would die. The dungeon god bet against that. The stake was a favor. What are you saying? They entered your heartland and are still getting through just fine. Wait for the time when they come back prepared. I doubt the next dungeon would pose such a hurdle, the system god answered confidently. The next you say? You are still underestimating this dungeon. The dungeon god only smiled knowingly. Chapter 775 Don't be afraid of the dark. Colossal Dungeon. By the time Lydia and Team 3 had paid a visit to every room on the floor of the giant mansion, 2 days went by but they all had reached Leave 93. At least it felt like 2 days for them. After traveling down the whole hallway which ended in a dead end, they turned around and returned to the staircase. Should we go up or return downstairs? Lydia left the choice to her party. On this floor, they had only met simple colossi and they had come up with a theory about the structure of the dungeon. Duhu had suggested that it was a residence-type dungeon, like a tower, a castle, or a mansion where several members of a specific race were accommodated. Many dungeons followed this pattern to various degrees. If the tiger was right in his assumption, this meant that the giant creatures on this floor were something like peasants without any skills or training. It also suggested that the insects they had met on the first, empty floor were actually just pests in an empty corner of the place the dungeon emulated. What was even more important was that the next floor could also have colossi with fighting skills, training, and magic abilities. They had gotten confident fighting the easy ones on this floor, but Lydia wanted them to decide whether they were ready to face an even greater challenge. Let's do this! Jess exclaimed. The fire mage had tasted blood. Maybe this time she would finally be able to get some kind of blessing. There was no way she would accept that she and James were not eligible for even a blessing. Right, let's go. James also agreed. Of course, they were not the only ones that had not been blessed, but the couple felt like they had to prove something. Unlike Azul or Duhu, they had no special race or physique, they also had no deep connection to the Tower Master like Lydia. I'm also in favor, Ferdinand asserted his stance. His situation was the most similar to Jess and James, as he had only recently joined Team 3. He had joined the campaign in the Holy Land and was given a legendary ring, but out of all of them, he had the least chance to shine. A priest was always important, but there was little to do if the party member could beat almost anything without getting so much as a scratch. The Abyss was the first real chance to act in his role as a healer. Even though he felt a little bad for it, he was happy to not just stand in the rear. The rest of the team was not any less confident in their skills and they unanimously decided to ascend the stairs to another landing and venture to the next floor. The good news was that the enemy did not get any bigger. Evade! Lydia screamed and the team scattered in all directions, as a leather boot the size of an apartment building came crashing down on them. Colossal Guard Leave 99, Elite. The moment they had climbed up the last step, they were welcomed by a guard. Unlike the ones on the last floor, it wore thick leather boots, leather trousers, a gambeson, and a full-face helmet. This was a huge step up compared to the other guys in their flimsy shirts and bare feet. This wasn't even fair. Phaenis quickly turned around after evading, slashing at the boot that came to crush them. Even if the leather was nothing special, it was extremely thick. Her simple attack left only a gash on the leather, but could not penetrate it. Only Duhu's axe managed to slash through but did not draw blood. Get back on the stairs! Lydia called out, shortly before everyone took the several-meter deep dive to the last step. It was a commonly known fact that dungeon mobs could not enter the paths between floors. They would pull back and talk about how to. It's following us, she heard Ferdinand, who had already fallen 2 steps down, scream from the front. What? She looked back, seeing a massive shoe sole coming down above her. Lydia's arms and legs stretched and her torso grew, as she instinctively turned into her Lycan form to evade the massive booting with a quick dive down the staircase. As did the others, except Duhu, who managed to cut off the tip of the boot using an aura blade from his axe. Again, no blood, but something was buried right beside the face of Jess who was lying on the ground not far away. It was a clipping of a very long toenail, that almost took her eye out. Kaie. Sorry. Duhu. You almost killed me, she screeched as she jumped up in shock. Guys. Why is it coming down the steps? Why can't it come down the steps? James screamed frantically. Calm down. Everyone, calm down. It's just a little tougher than the others. Attack it with aura skills and magic. James, get its attention and distract it. Lydia gave instructions. Fine. With the light of night's challenge, James managed to pull its aggro away from the others and started weaving between the giant's feet. While he bought time for the team to assemble again, the massive guard suddenly started bending over. Hands the size of basketball courts started smacking for him. He summoned his mount and used the agility boost of his new class to run circles around the Colossus. He managed to dodge twice, but the third time, he had no chance to dodge and could only unsummon his mount and hide begin Cerberus shield as he was smacked across the stair, crashing into the opposite wall. He could feel that several of his ribs and his shield arm were broken. His health was down by a third in a single slap. When the guard was about to straighten itself and finish him with a stomp, a slew of arrows finally hammered into its helmet, distracting it. At the same time, a golden light enveloped James and he could feel the awkward feeling of his bones setting themselves back in place and healing. For moments like this, it was great to have a dedicated priest. Ferdinand's skill quickly healed his health back up as the pain faded and James was ready to join the battle again in a matter of 30 seconds. While Lydia's and Archer's arrows dinged against the helmet, dealing hardly any damage, a massive dark fireball hit the guard on the chest, setting the gambeson on fire. It was massive in human terms, but to the guard, it was only the size of a tennis ball. Still in the middle of straightening himself, the guard started to panic as the cursed fire spread across its body, eating away at the gambeson. Now! Quick! Duhu and Faina started hacking away at the guard's ankle. The bandit lady cut through the thick leather of the boot, while Duhu hacked into the guard's heel. The bent over, panicking, burning Colossus was hit by the pain of his Achilles sinew snapping. With a deceptive slowness, it started tilting and fell down the stairs with crashing thunders. The harrowing sound of massive bones breaking echoing through the vicinity was the sign that the colossal guard felt the true horror of fall damage. The guard did not get the chance to think long about the pain of the fall as a bloodthirsty party of adventurers started wailing at its head and neck. His screams and roars echoed through the stairwell. Once they were in his helmet, there was only a world of pain until it finally drew its last breath and fell silent. Chapter 776 Into the Gap. That was a surprise. Lydia sighed when she climbed out from the helmet, covered in blood. The others were also drenched in blood and sweat. The fight was not tiresome, but quite stressful. They were about to return to the top of the stairs when... It's too early to relax. Archer mentioned moments before the others started hearing a rhythmic thumping. Boom, 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 it kept getting louder and louder. We should run. It's the doors on the floor above being thrown open. Archer suddenly said in a panic. He had the best sight among them, so nobody doubted his words, even if they couldn't see anything of the floor form their position. It clicked immediately. If the guard was able to walk down the stairs, then the other mobs would be able to do the same. They were about to face a whole group of colossi. They couldn't possibly fight a huge number of them at once. They had taken their sweet time, to go from door to kill them one by one, leaving ample time to recover in between. It didn't matter whether these guys were also guard, or not. They couldn't fight a group fight. Ignoring the screaming of their knees and ankles, the party started running and jumping down the stairs at top speed. However, no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't possibly outrun the giants. James jumped down several steps at once, rolling off and getting back to his feet. His dark past as a not-so-upright citizen had taught him how to face falls from great heights. Looking around, he saw the figure of a colossus at the top of the stair, but what made his heart ache was seeing Jess suddenly collapsing in the distance. "Jess! Are you okay?" she exclaimed and ran over to his girlfriend. "I'm fine. It's just my shoulder," she mumbled, her arm hanging limply down at the side of her body. She had the same experience he did, however, when she tried to copy his move, she forgot that he had gained the stats of a tank, while she was a caster. He could take the fall of several steps, she couldn't without breaking her shoulder in an attempt to roll off. "Ferdinand!" James called out, but the priest wasn't around. He was still several steps above. "James, watch out," he heard someone call out, but it was too late. The knight had little time to think about the priest when suddenly a colossus came barreling down the stair. He didn't come running down, but he had tripped somewhere above and was rolling down, over his dead comrade, in a chaotic manner. "Hold on tight, he instructed the confused Jess as. She proceeded to clamp her healthy arm around his waist and jammed the broken one under his belt. No time to evade, no time to wait, James instinctively used all the skills he gained as a tank and from his equipment on Jess and lifted the shield of Cerberus, just in time to block the flailing arm of the falling Colossus. His shield held. His defense held. The couple was flung off the stairs and into the depth. Jess screeched in his ears as they fell through the gap between stairs. In a matter of seconds, they saw the steps they had laboriously climbed up, shoot past them on their way down. They had no chance to maneuver as they already passed the floor where they initially entered the dungeon and kept falling deeper. Past that floor, only darkness surrounded them and they could barely make out the outlines of the steps they passed, even with night vision. What do we do? Jess screamed over the wind. He could see her tear being flung upward by the wind. This was not how they imagined their death. In that moment it didn't matter that one didn't actually die in a dungeon, this was as real as it could be. Brace for the impact. Don't worry, I won't let you die, James said with a calm smile. What are you talking about? What are you doing? She cried when James suddenly pulled her into a tight embrace, activating even more skills. I will take the brunt of the fall for you. Then you just have to hide and wait for the others. What are you saying? We can just leave with home call. Jess cried, even more tears flowing from her eyes when she saw his sad smile. He had already tried it, but home call was blocked in the dungeon. Maybe in the whole abyss. If they wanted to leave, they had to walk out, die, or clear the dungeon. I don't want that. If we can't get out together safely, we should leave together like this. She complained and tried to get out of his tight embrace, but he did not budge. Do you really think I could let you die with a calm mind, just because we are both leaving at the same time? He asked in derision. He wore the Cerberus shield on his back and the 3 translucent copies created by Triple Guard layered on top of it, all to dampen the impact. It wasn't like he had given up on his life completely. With the effects of Pack Leader, Guard Dog, Triple Guard and Shield Wall that was copied to the 3 copies of Triple Guard, he had low hopes for both of them making it. Though also used Noble Sacrifice which linked his life to that of Jess. In case both of them made it, he would absorb any damage she sustained, on top of his own. Like hell, I will let you sacrifice yourself. She mumbled. Quickly the couple was also surrounded in a 2-layered fire shield, and a barrier that made them look like a tiny burning meteor. James only smiled, seeing her do her best to save them, too. I love you thump. Was the last thing Jess heard. His words were swallowed by the sudden impact. She woke up, feeling very sick. Her stomach was revolting. Absolute darkness covered her eyes as she tried to look around. Trying to breathe, thick clumps of dust and dirt filled her mouth. She was alive, buried alive. She coughed and struggled and instinctively pulled herself out from the loose dirt that covered her. Jess took a deep breath on the surface, only for heavy, stinky, rotten air to fill her lungs, making her stomach revolt even more. Vomit-inducing was the right word, as her stomach emptied itself, while snot and tears were running down her face. James. James, where are you? After her first terrible breath, which proved to her that she was alive, her first thought was to look for James. Maybe, if the loose dirt had cushioned their fall, maybe he was alive? Right? He had to be. She was alive, and James also had to survive. There was no other option. Her bare hands clawed through the rubbish and refuse of the stairs above that had probably collected here for centuries. Barely able to see her hand thanks to night vision, she felt and dug around for a sign of James. The longer she looked without finding a sign, the lower her heart sank, but she kept repeating that there was no way that James was dead. At this moment it did not matter to her, that James would just wake up in the Adventurer Guild branch at Minapalan. She kept looking and digging and searching until she finally heard an shallow gasp in the darkness. She would recognize his gasps anywhere. Chapter 777 at the bottom. Jess? Are we alive? He asked, gasping, quickly regretting taking in the horrible air. Yes. Yes, we are alive, you big idiot, she said in a hushed voice, with big tears streaming down her cheeks. Ugh, you are hugging me too tightly, I can't breathe, maybe that's for the better, he joked. Stop talking, I will help you get out of there. I guess we survived because we fell in all of this loose garbage, she explained while shoving away the loose, stinging dirt. Where are we? James mumbled. It was clear that he had taken the greater hit and still had a hard time grasping the situation. I think this is the very bottom of this dungeon. Well, fell past a lot of stair. Jess said, remembering their tragic fall. After removing the dirt down to his waist, she tried pulling him out, but the knight hurriedly stopped her. Ah! Wait, this won't work. I think my legs are broken, James pressed out, resisting the urge to scream. Who knew how deep they were and what creatures inhabited this floor? Screaming here, in this situation could still mean their end. It would be bitter to die after surviving that fall. What were they supposed to do? This thought filled his brain. He didn't know how long they had been down here, but his skills were already off cooldown, so it had to have been quite a bit. His legs were broken and the next priest was several hundred or even 1,000 meters above them. Where are your thoughts wandering again? Here, drink the high potion first, she brought him enlightenment. She also helped him drink the health potion, but they quickly found that it didn't have its usual effect. James' health only regenerated slowly. Maybe it's this place, James asserted. At least his head started clearing a little after drinking a potion. You really think there could be a place that hinders the effects of potions? Jess asked doubtfully. Well, this is also a dungeon where the mobs can simply leave their floors. What's weird about hampering the power of potions? James shrugged. Jess had to admit that there were many different dungeons. She remembered the briefing the guild people had given them before coming to the Holy Land. They said that the stronger a dungeon was, the further it would stray from the generic templates they knew. The more bizarre it was, the higher the difficulty for the pioneers that faced it first. Take my ring, Jess suddenly told him, holding up her legendary ring. Why would I take your ring? Keep it, who knows what lurks around down here. It's not like I can use magic anyway. James denied her request, having difficulty grasping why she even said that. A flick to the forehead focused his attention back on her. Doofus, I am not telling you to wear it and cast magic. It grants the trait nurtured by flames. If you wear it, I can technically heal you through fire. Seth had explained to her that the trait was similar to a skill called flame absorption, except that its effects were more varied and supple. The trait allowed the user to slowly absorb the fire in the surroundings to increase the stats, such as health regeneration, mana regeneration, defense, and magic attack. As a matter of fact, this also meant that the fire element would not harm the wearer. This was not the same as casting a healing spell but was the only way she came up with to heal James, by increasing his health regeneration. James was still not fully convinced when he heard her explanation, but he still took her ring and put it on his finger. At this moment, Jess was just glad the ring was not soul-bound. Although she had signed a soul contract that she could never hand the ring to anyone, it actually made an exception for sharing it in a party. Jess proceeded to sit down behind him, laying her hand on his shoulder like she was going to massage him. Without the ring, she started chanting a long spell that created a sphere of fire around them. Here she left the trodden path of the system. As a magician specialized in fire, her mana sense skill was dialed in on fire elemental mana. A mage could also cast a spell without relying on elemental mana in the air, but doing so did not only strengthen the power but also lowered the costs. It was a principle of advanced spells, that could also be used on simpler spells, once mastered. Now, she was using this to keep concentrating more and more fire elemental mana around them, using the fire sphere around them as a framework. Sweat started pouring down her skin and drenched the inner layers of her armor as the temperature rose. A fire mage had a high resistance to fire, but without the ring, she was not immune. Even when it was her own spell, the elemental mana was not hers. It's working, Jess. My health has started regenerating much faster. I should be able to get out in a few minutes, James whispered excitedly. The effect of nurtured by flames he currently felt was exhilarating. Good, she pressed out, having a hard time breathing in the sweltering heat. Her sweat evaporated the moment it appeared on her skin and the armor she wore felt more and more constricting, like wearing an oven. Jess? Are you okay, Jess? James called out in a slight panic when he saw her suddenly struggling to even sit upright. His heart started racing when he saw the tip of her hair starting to smoke and fizzle out. Can you hear me? Stop the spell or skill. Whatever you are doing, you have to stop. He struggled to get out, despite his broken legs. He tried to turn around, but her hands clamped down on his shoulder. As he was hectically trying to make her stop, he got another reason for his heart to drop. Maybe it was the light of the fire sphere, maybe it was his frantic struggle to stop her, but he suddenly heard a rumbling in the darkness. The shuffling of something massive, slowly grinding over the ground. Then he heard the deep cry of metal echoing in the air like something really big and metallic was being abused. Jess, Jess! You have to stop. We have to hide. Please, come to your senses. Shut up, I am in my senses. I can take it. Just a moment longer, just a little bit more, she kept repeating. Shit, she was not in her right mind at all. His legs were already healed, but she wouldn't let go of his shoulders. Looking behind, he saw her hair burning in a blaze. Dozens of thoughts swirled through his head as he panicked about what to do, but it all stopped when he heard a distinctive sound. His body followed its muscle memories as he jumped out from the dirt, pulling her along, her hands still clamped on his shoulders. Once again all kinds of lights flashed around him, as he activated all the skills he had to protect her life. The next moment a rusty pillar of metal smashed into the flame sphere, crashing into the shield James created. He and Jess were pushed through the loose dirt all the way to solid ground, where James got to experience a second, even worse impact. Ugh! He felt his bones break and his muscles rip, but at the same time, he felt the power surrounding them flow into him. Jess' hair was burning brightly, but it didn't harm her. Instead, her life was constantly filled up through his skill noble sacrifice, while his own health was recovered through her fire and nurtured by flames. Keeping up the shield was the only thing that dominated his mind, as he felt his bones crack and heal under the pressure. Even when his skill broke, and the metal thing crashed directly into the Cerberus shield, he held up. They were caught in a loop as the fire sphere grew constantly hotter and denser, both kept alive through their shared health and the legendary ring. It grew to the point that he felt the pressure wane, and drops of molten metal started falling on the floor below them. Even when the weapon rose back up, James was frozen in his stance, not lowering his shield, convinced Jess would die, if he dared to lower it. Ding! You and your partner have been chosen by Hyy and Clinker. Chapter 778 Hard to End. Theater Dimension. Are you lovebirds trying to get in my way or something? The dungeon god gave the two figures sitting 2 rows behind him the snake eye. One couldn't see anything but shadows under his hood, but he definitely gave off the aura of giving a disapproving/warning look. The god couple looked shocked and intimidated, they huddled together but didn't dare say anything. The dice were cast, they couldn't take back what they did. Hey, now! You are saying that as if they know about our bet. Leave the kids alone, the system god said gloatingly. The two in question were Clinker and Hyy, a divine pair of earth god and fire goddess. They were by no means well known or very powerful, but still bona fide gods. All gods paying the fees were allowed to choose champions or saints through the system. Young gods like them usually used this method to spread their religion. A chosen would often also be a saint. Since it was part of the system god was bound to side with them. The fact that it helped in his bet was just icing on the cake. Ugh, fine. It won't help them anyways. Elemental Dungeon. Ding! You have killed Terran Scout Leave 94. Experience gained. A humanoid figure made of earth and stone crumbled for the 5th time when Monique finally heard the notification. They had climbed down the gorge and found that it was like a cut directly through an anthill. The light they could see at the bottom seemed to be from the flowing magma. The jagged walls of the gorge were filled with entrances to caves and tunnels. The party entered the close one, after which they met the Terran creatures for the first time. Albeit not immune to physical damage, they had high defenses. They had several layers of armor that encased their bodies and great regenerative powers. It strongly reminded her of the stone giant Seth had talked about. Fighting these guys was not as bothersome as the phantoms, but they were tricky. They had to pay attention to the system messages, or otherwise, it could happen that they didn't actually destroy their true body that was hidden somewhere in the dirt. While Jonah and Monique were able to gain back some of the confidence they lost in the previous fight, Shay started despairing. He was a mage who specialized in water and a little in ice. His specialty was useless in the previous fight and he was the least useful this time again. Whether he used the trident's cascade pierce or similar offensive water magic, it had little effect on the creature made of earth. He was barely able to crash the outer shell of one enemy with several spells. It was impossible to not feel inferior when he saw Monique break several shells in a single stab. Even Allison and Shay were doing well, for themselves, curses worked well, while Allison had an above-average magic damage. Even when the Terran humanoid had not the weakness, the wizard simply powered through with firepower. This worked a lot better when there was something physical to hit. The best Shay could do at this point was playing the support for the others. Using ice spells he kept impeding the movement of the enemy to make it easier on the others. He was playing a role, but it still bore heavy on his thoughts, that he couldn't do anything more productive. "Shay, get your head out of the clouds," he suddenly heard Monique shout from the front. "I know what you are thinking, and it's okay. We all have opponents we are weak against." I and Jonah felt the same on the surface. "Stop worrying and just conserve your strength. I'm sure your time will come." Although he didn't want to admit it, her words helped lighten his worries and concentrate on playing the support using frost magic. Ding! Your skill Ice Magic, Adept, Leave 4 has become Ice Magic, Adept, Leave 5. At least he was not without gain. He was mainly a water mage, so his skill in Ice Magic did lag a little behind. Now that he constantly used the Ice Magic, its proficiency kept increasing and it even leveled up. The party kept exploring the tunnels they first entered but didn't find any paths further down. They all calmed down a little since the earth elemental creatures had a much better compatibility with them. They farmed all the mobs they could find and returned to the gorge where they climbed to the next hole in the wall. "Ugh! Be careful!" Allison suddenly called out the moment they arrived in the new tunnel. They looked back, seeing blood running from her ears. Tekker acted quickly and erected his shields again. "I thought we were past that." Ray grumbled. He had also felt the pressure on his ears, but Allison had been the main target. He hurriedly used a shamanistic healing spell, when he saw blood seeping from tiny cuts across her exposed skin. They all knew what this meant. There was at least one more of the air mobs from the plains in the tunnel, hiding its presence. It seemed like the difficulty had risen, as the presence of the Terrans was quite obvious. "These," Allison cursed pissed as she chugged down a health potion in addition to Ray's spell. The moment they entered, the monsters had immediately tried to get rid of the party's strongest caster, her. "All right, I doubt there are many of the airheads, but probably stronger than the ones on the surface. They must be hiding, waiting for a chance. Everyone, be careful. Tekker, keep up the shield. We will go with hit and run." Since they had already faced both types of enemies, Monique quickly came up with a simple strategy. For the sake of their health and armor durability, they would use Tekker and his shield as a moving base. They would fight from within the shield. The caster would hit the Terrans with magic while Jonah and Monique would enter and leave the cover to fight the Earthheads before they reached the shield, only exposing themselves to the attacks of the Airheads for short moments at a time. The strategy worked surprisingly well, as the Airheads alone could not break through the shield. Maybe if all the mobs simultaneously besieged the shield, it may have had a chance to break, but currently, it was hard to imagine what kind of creature it would take to get past Tekker's main defense. They kept proceeding this way without major problems until the surroundings started changing 3 tunnels later. The places the Earthheads appeared resembled tunnels dug into the ground, like the burrows of animals, but further down the party entered natural caves. It was dark and wet inside these caves, but the moist air was refreshing to breathe compared to the oppressive atmosphere further above. The first thing they met here were stronger Terrans. Instead of the mix of earth and rocks, these guys were closer to stone golems with an even better defense. While the airheads had vanished for now, the new aptly named Stoneheads hot supper from a new kind of creature. More elite enemies also started to appear further down, but they had not met anything one could call a boss, yet. Hyy Hound Leave 93, Elite. Following their naming convention, they called them Waterheads and they came in a lot greater variety than the air and Stoneheads. Some were the shapes of humanoids, but most had varying shapes of animals. There didn't seem to be a big difference in base ability, but they could be easier and harder to deal with depending on their shape. At this point, it was finally time for Shay and Allison to truly shine. The Waterheads shared the same immunity to physical attacks as the Airheads. In addition, their attacks and spells had a greater damage potential. Their basic water blades and guns chipped away a lot more durability from Tekker's shield than any attack from the Airheads. If any party had somehow managed to get past the phantoms on the surface by luck or accident, this would have been their end once and for all. One tended to underestimate water, but these water elementals had the same strengths as the air with a higher damage output. Fortunately, their party had not made it down here by pure luck. Since the Waterheads had a physical shape, they were a much easier target for magic, especially ice and lightning magic showed great effect against them. While Allison would raise them with spells like Chain Lightning, Shay could not only negate most of their water attacks but also freeze several of them at a time with spells like Frost Nova or Ice Field. Since the casters took care of the water-based opponents, the vanguards had more than enough time to concentrate on the strengthened Stoneheads. They were basically the same creatures, with several shells and hard-to-end lives. Only their damage had gotten a tremendous increase, forcing them to hit them a few more times per layer of the shell. Nonetheless, they proceeded on their path further down, without major problems. Chapter 779 Bunch of Dawns. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now level 94. Seth didn't quite know how much time went by, but he had crossed 28 bridges and met another 2 bosses by the time his level went up again. The dungeon also had gone through a peculiar change. As Seth kept getting lower and lower on the bridges, a dim light started shining in the abyss below, and the naming convention of the monsters also changes, with beings like Cruel Dawn and Splendid Dawn becoming the main cast of monsters attacking the bridges. These monsters were based on the 2 bosses he had met previously. Cruel Dawn was the name of the first real boss he met. It was technically a version of the Twilight creatures, but instead of a skin that looked pale with dark ashes rubbed on it, it was covered in grisly scales with reptilian features distorting the face. It also had 3 snake-like tails that ended in scorpion stingers. Despite its tankiness and size, the necessity to protect the bridges was a bigger hurdle to the pair of Hyy and Blacksmith, than being able to defeat the beast. Its massive size, several limbs, and its constant attempt to hang itself onto the bridge had made it an annoying boss fight, even for Seth. At least the bridges also went through a change and started becoming more splendid. It was not just the fact that they were in much better condition than the derelict bridges in the beginning, but they started showing exquisite masonry works and signs of metal constructions the closer he came to the light below. Had they not become better and more stable, it was questionable whether Seth and Tatzel could have defended them. At this point, the bridges were wide enough that even beings like the massive bosses and their elite copies could stand on the bridges. The other boss he met was Splendid Dawn. Compared to the Cruel Dawn, it kept its humanoid features. Instead, it had 2 pairs of feathery, dark wings and a slight sheen of gold, as if gold powder was mixed into the ashes on its skin. Albeit less than half the size of Cruel Dawn, it had the same defense with a much higher speed and stronger skills in melee combat. Objectively, the Splendid Dawn was the stronger boss, but subjectively, speed wasn't something that worked on Seth. He had to admit that the boss had a better weapon mastery, but that was all. The Blacksmith was able to use his exotic mix of skills such as the short-range teleportation of Scorpio Escape and Lame One's Walk to keep the upper hand in the fight. The latter skill even grew to level 9 afterward. Since the bosses faced him on the wider bridges, instead of staying in the air, he finally got the chance to loot these 2, making the souls he got from them the most noteworthy loot so far. Soul of Dawn, epic, big, crafting material. The soul of a creature of twilight. Had strong affinities with the dark element and some affinity with the light element. Trait, Beast of Dawn. Aside from that, the materials he got from the bosses he faces so far were the wing leather of Twilight from the Stoic Twilight, feathers of Twilight from the Splendid Dawn, and a good amount of reptilian leather of Twilight from the Cruel Dawn. After the 2 bosses, the swarms he faces were mostly made up of elite copies of Cruel and Splendid Dawn. The good part was that he also got their materials, since many of them would land on the bridges to fight. The bad part was that their materials were barely worth looting. While the boss materials were epic, the elite copies only dropped rare leathers, of which Minasmar had more than enough. Seth still brought them along, even if they clattered his inventory. They had a lot of fresh blacksmiths at home, who would be happy to work with rare materials. Seth felt a little like a mommy bird who collected fresh materials for its chicks at home to practice with. He inadvertently imagined Neil and the other new faces greedily grabbing the leather out of his hands, the moment he came to the workshops. He had to smile at funny thoughts, that didn't really fit his current situation, as he was wandering deeper and deeper into the dungeon. However, the blacksmith actually felt refreshed, since the increasing difficulty finally gave him a chance to explore all the skills that normally lay dormant. For example, he started to instinctively use quick cast and add double cast from his cloak of Hecate, when he fired magic from his Trignus gloves. He also got used to not just adding the draconic titan flame to the magic he cast, but even using his pyrokinesis to control the magic after it was cast. His favorite magic to use in his situation was the flame lance. It was the strongest projectile spell in fire magic. Usually, it would penetrate the enemy and then explode. Using pyrokinesis, he gave the spell a little spin, and instead of getting stuck and exploding on the first enemy, Seth controlled the lances to shoot down several targets before exploding. This was also one of the first instances when he truly felt the effect of the intelligence attribute. It didn't raise one education and made one incredibly smart, but it increased the player's memory and computational abilities. Seth was able to keep track and control a swarm of 20 different fire lances effectively while still fighting in melee combat. He had never done or tried anything like that before since he was never in the need to try and do something like this. This strategy cost a lot of mental power to use the pyrokinesis ability, but it saved mana in exchange since he didn't have to create a lance for every enemy. Not that Seth needed to min-max his stats in this fight. The cost of casting a fire lance or the cost of controlling one were both negligible compared to his mana pool and mental power. It was simply exciting to find new ways to use his skills in combat, even if it was not necessarily the best way to approach the situation. For example, Seth could have also used his Dragon Might and Dragon Roar to make them fall. He could have also shot them down with arrows or used the light attribute skills of Antares to do something. Seth had a lot of tricks up his sleeves, so he had ample things to explore further into the future. For example, on the ground, he fought the splendid Dong copies using the Giant's Meteor Rod. He had learned how to wield a spear from Monique, and his weapon master, expert, had reached Level 9 and was close to a rank up. Seth worked on weaving simple earth spells and the skills of his armor into his melee combat. With the passive improvements from the Scorpion armor and the Giant's Rod, even simple spells like Earth Spike show a tremendous effect on the elite opponents. Not as powerful as his fire magic, but enough to give him a clear edge in combat on the bridge. While the sky was lit up by seemingly conscious fire lances and Tatzel's fearsome magic, the bridge was a chaotic mass of earth spikes and sandstorms. The blacksmith still tried to get the spell right to petrify enemies with a dust cloud and imitate the power of the Giant's Meteor Rod, without using the item skill itself. It was weird to say, but Seth actually enjoyed being able to get the chance and text out the variety of his skills. The bosses had been a little annoying, but he grew a liking to the group fights that kept increasing in difficulty. While the others struggled in the dungeons of the abyss, Seth actually got the chance to experiment with his skills as much as he liked. Tatzel was not much different. Fully trusting Seth's protection, the MUG went all out with his magic and started developing spell variations at a visible speed. The little genius did not have to depend on the system to chant and create magic spells. As a creature that was almost a dragon, magic came naturally to it. They proceeded like this until they reached what was the 50th bridge if they counted correctly. This place seemed a little special. The light from below had grown very bright. The bridge they had reached was made of a stone looking like pure white marble, with exquisite carvings and masonry on the pillars to the sides and railings intricately forged from a bright silver metal. The bosses in this dungeon were not spaced evenly, though they didn't know the reason for that, but this place just screamed boss arena. The moment they placed a foot on the pure marble, they heard the melodramatic flapping of wings as a pure white figure landed before them. Her skin was white like milk and her eyes were made of gold. Wearing a silver crown on her head and with two fluffy white wings on her back, her majestic 2-meter-tall figure looked down at them. She wore a robe as white as her skin, looking like a statue hewn from the same stone as the bridge. However, her jiggle physics convinced Seth otherwise. A fine golden chain tied a sword sheath to her slim waist. The accompanying sword was in her hand. "Intruder, what is your reason for coming here?" the being asked coldly, with a strict, feminine voice. Chapter 780 Strategy of Survival. Experience, what else? Isn't that the whole reason you dick waffles invaded our world, too? Seth asked plainly. Was this lady that stupid, or just pretentious? Mom, my spells are ready. Tell me when to strike, Tatzel reported from the back. Wait a little longer. It's not often a boss strikes up a conversation. Let's see where this goes. What a profane desire. I will allow you to leave now. She looked surprised at Seth's brash answer but quickly returned to a haughty attitude. I don't think this is the last floor. Why would I return? Seth commented with a smile. He had no intention to leave. Turn around, you stand no chance. I have been created with all your powers in mind. You cannot win, she insisted. Mirror of Dawn, leave -- boss. Seth didn't need her to tell him, he could already see that it was true. All her stats perfectly countered what Seth and Tatzel had shown in the dungeon so far. Her magic defense was so high, that she was almost immune to magic. She was 90% resistant to earth, lightning, and fire elements. The only thing that lacked a little behind was her physical defense and the resistance against other elements. Yet, that wasn't even the biggest problem. Although he could see most of her stats, he couldn't see her level, so she was probably above Level 100. If what he had shown so far was all the blacksmith was capable of, then he would have had to admit that he would have had no chance. However, she had not seen anything yet. Her potential level didn't scare him. Tatzel, put a shield around you and the band. Let me handle this. She just decided to quickly kill the intruders, when the black worm suddenly set up a barrier and a piece of weird music started filling the bridge. Two instruments had appeared that were emitting a gaudy tune with demonic power swinging in the notes. Only the little man stepped out from the barrier, spreading his arms like he was embracing the world. You are right. I wouldn't be able to beat you with simple tactics. But, let me tell you a secret. As he spoke, she could hear his voice distort as if several people said the same words at once. The next moment she saw that she had not heard wrong, as 5 identical men in armor stepped out of him, like superimposed illusions. Each held a different weapon. The center one still held the spear, while one was a broad saber, and another had a kind of freezing rapier. There was also a hammer, a bow, and a crude axe. First you see us. They all said in tune with the music, making a step to the left. Now you don't. Making a step to the right, they all suddenly vanished. Now you hear us. Now you won't. The chant vanished. It's our secret of survival is a very nasty world, they sang in a demonic choir directly beside her. They all suddenly surrounded her without her even being able to notice when they had gotten there. She immediately reacted, raising her weapon and wings to guard, but there was no way to block all of them. She felt the cuts and impacts on her body. Now you feel us. Now you can't. Suddenly the pain in her body vanished, but the wounds and gashes slashed on her body were still obvious to the eye. A cold shiver ran down her back. How could this happen? She was a being of dawn that had stepped on her path to becoming a deity. How could demonic music have such effects on her? The fountains of glittery silver blood brought her back to her senses. She could not feel the pain, nor see the attacker, but the wounds kept appearing across her body. She focused and was able to see them again. Are we real? Perhaps we aren't, the clones said, suddenly disassembling and vanishing again before appearing again in quick succession as they kept chanting it's our secret of survival in a very nasty world while attacking her without pause. Ugh, she had underestimated the little man. She had tried to send them off, to save herself trouble, but now she saw that this was her mistake. Trying to formulate a plan, her mouth suddenly gained its own will. Is it really such a nasty world? She asked inadvertently. Oh, yes. A very nasty world, the little man answered. Nastier than you can ever dream of, the others added in a choir. From up above, one of them suddenly attacked her crown. And from beneath, another broke through the tiles of the bridge and attacked from below. Eyes and jaws, the frosty rapier stabbed for her jugular. Claws and teeth, the broad saber hacked for her kidney from behind. Ready to attack you. You're a little snack, you better run. The first line came with a shower of bright arrows, the second was spoken by a clone, swinging a hammer at her kneecap. Don't start to revel in your victory, when you haven't got it done. As they sang and danced around her, she was covered in a swirl of attacks, having a hard time defending herself, much less finding a chance to retaliate. When the song finally waned after several repetitions, she was still alive, but her situation was horrible as she suddenly felt dozens of wounds across her body. Her health had fallen to 2/3 of her max health. Looking up, she saw the little man standing where he stood before the music started as if he had never moved at all. The only thing that had changed was the smug smile on his face. How did you like my performance? He asked, seeing that he got her attention again. Unexpected, but far from enough, she spat out. Indignation and shame fueled her wrath. She had given the monkey a chance, but he had kicked it with his feet. She would show no more mercy. Using the chance, she stood straight up and used her recovery skill, but her wounds that should have rapidly healed showed almost no sign of recovery. When she focused, she could feel a dark, murky mana in her wounds. Was it his demonic music or something else? Don't worry, I can give you a whole personal concert if you would like me to. An anvil appeared in front of the man and the ominous hammer was in his hand. He was backed by 2 floating instruments as a flaming crown appeared on top of his helmet. She couldn't help but stare as her eyes were drawn to the crown and she felt his voice sinking into her mind. She clutched her head, suddenly feeling dizzy and sick. She tried to collect her energy for a skill, but a sudden thump broke her concentration. The man had hit the anvil with his hammer, but it didn't produce a clear sound of metal clashing, but a deep, rumbling boom. She could feel it vibrate deep in her chest. A booming voice started slowly talking in her head, matching the beat of the anvil. I like you 'cause you got that something that I need in my life, so give it to me. A sudden torrent of blood traveled up her throat and filled her mouth. Nobody had moved, but she felt like a troll had boxed her in the stomach. "'Cause you got that, like you, 'cause you got that something that I need in my life, that I need, so." Every thump of the beat suddenly felt like a heavy impact, while the demonic voice in her ears would not stop filling her mind with incoherent messages stopping her from catching a clear thought. Trapped in her own confused mind, she could only endure the pain, as invisible forces broke her body.